Welcome to a new episode of the podcast. Vox Agent is made by AI for business executives that work with AI. Today, we're doing a deep dive into, well, a really critical decision for enterprises working with generative AI. It's that choice, open source versus proprietary solutions. And it's not just about the sticker price, right? It's about the total cost of ownership, the TCO. We're seeing huge investments here. Corporate AI budgets basically doubled between early and late 2024. We're talking an average of around $10 million now. So with stakes that high, every single dollar has got to pull its weight, justify its business value.
Exactly. And that's why this conversation is so vital right now. You know, the AI landscape in 2025, it feels very familiar in some ways, like past IT shifts. Think open versus closed ecosystems.
Yeah.
You've got these powerful proprietary services, your GPT-4s, your Claude's leading on capability. Yeah, but they come with usage fees and that big one, vendor lock-in. Then you have the open source wave like Meta's Llama models. They're free to use commercially, offer amazing flexibility, incredible control.
But there's always a but.
Right, but that flexibility means you're doing the heavy lifting. In-house management, expertise, it becomes a major strategic choice, not just a tech one.
Absolutely. So that's our mission for this deep dive. Let's unpack the real TCO nuances for generative AI. We got to look way beyond that initial cost. We need the full picture, all the expenses, the strategic bits over the whole life cycle.
Okay, so let's unpack this. What exactly are we talking about when we say total cost of ownership for generative AI?
Well, comprehensively, TCO here is way more than just, buying a license or the initial development. It covers the whole spectrum. You've got your infrastructure cloud, on-prem GPUs, the cost to actually train or fine-tune these models, integration effort, ongoing software fees or API costs, and crucially, maintenance and support, whether that's paying a vendor or staffing your own team. And don't forget things like compliance, security. It all adds up over the life of the solution. It's complex, yeah, comparing apples and oranges sometimes, but you have to do it for smart investments. That makes sense. It's the whole iceberg, not just the tip. So where does it get really interesting? Let's dive into the nuts and bolts. Infrastructure seems like a huge one.
It often is, yeah. Especially with open source. The cost structure tends to flip from OpEx, operational expenses, more towards CapEx, capital expenses.
Yeah.
So the enterprise, you're investing in the hardware, buying servers, maybe GPUs, or renting these pretty expensive GPU instances in the cloud.
Right.
I mean, there was one estimate, kind of hypothetical, but training something like Llama 3.1 on AWS could run close to $500 million in compute.
$500 million? Wow. Okay, that's extreme, but it makes the point.
Exactly. Most aren't doing that, but it shows how compute can dominate, even just for inference, running the model to get answers self-hosting. You could be looking at, say, $10,000 to $50,000 a month just for compute, plus storage, data center costs.
And if you're not using it all the time...
That's the kicker. You're pushing for peak, right?
Yeah.
So any unused capacity is just, well, sunk cost, money down the drain.
Okay, that CapEx sounds pretty intimidating. But I assume there's an upside. A point where owning it pays off.
Oh, absolutely. The big benefit is once you've paid for that infrastructure and you're using it heavily, your cost per query can get incredibly low. It amortizes over time. There's definitely a break-even point. If your usage is really high, continuous things, millions of queries a day, owning that stack can become much cheaper than paying per API call. For big players, it makes sense.
Okay, so that's open source. Now, proprietary flips that, right? They take the infrastructure pain away.
Mostly, yeah. They abstract it into usage-based pricing. Pure OpEx. You pay per, say, 1,000 tokens processed, no upfront hardware cost for you. Scalability, pretty much elastic on demand. Setup is usually quick, cheaper initially.
Sounds good, but what's the catch?
The catch is those costs scale directly with usage, linearly. More tokens, more cost.
Wow.
That example you mentioned earlier, 50 million tokens a month. That could easily hit $1.5 million a year in API fees.
Right, so pay as you go is great until you go a lot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to see where those cost curves cross. Proprietary is often brilliant for bursty, unpredictable workloads you only pay when you use it. There was a Lenovo study, actually, that found cloud platforms are great for short-term AI stuff, but on-prem, owned infrastructure wins for sustained high-throughput work.
So that break-even point is really the key. It's not simply open is cheaper. It depends entirely on your usage profile.
Precisely. Low usage. Proprietary APIs probably minimize your TCO. Almost certainly. But once you start processing, say, over 10 million tokens daily, analysis suggests that's often where custom open source starts looking cheaper, maybe after 18-24 months.
We saw that in those examples. The finance firm, High Volume, broke even around 27 months. Open source became cheaper long-term. But the e-commerce company, Moderate Volume, Proprietary was always cheaper for them, never hit that break even.
Right, because the fixed costs of open source are high up front. You need volume to spread that cost out. Proprietary starts cheap, low barrier to entry, but the costs just keep accumulating with use.
So the big question for any executive listening is, what does your workload projection look like that really drives the infrastructure cost piece?
Okay, moving beyond compute, let's talk customization. Tailoring these models. With open source, you get full control right, access to the weights.
You do, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword cost-wise. On the plus side, you can fine-tune that model specifically for your domain, your data. You might even get better results on niche tasks than a giant general-purpose proprietary model, and potentially you could use a smaller open model, fine-tune it, and save on compute compared to a huge proprietary one. Total freedom.
But the other edge of the sword.
The effort and the cost of that effort. You need the engineers, the MLOps, pipelines. That's the whole infrastructure for managing machine learning models. You're doing the integration, connecting data, building interfaces, managing latency, monitoring. It all falls on you. Proprietary vendors often give you tools, SDKs, wrappers to make that easier. Open source, more heavy lifting.
And fine-tuning itself isn't trivial, I assume? Not at all. You need good, clean data. You need compute for the tuning runs. You need expertise to tweak the parameters just right. So it really begs the question, do you have the internal team, the data, the capabilities to actually use that flexibility effectively?
Sounds like a big investment in people and process. So proprietary side, easier integration.
Generally, yes, much easier. You're consuming an API or a managed service, less plumbing needed. The vendor gives you documentation, SDKs, support. Fine-tuning might be limited, sure, but the overall integration effort is way lower. You're mainly just making API calls, handling responses. That can save, tens, maybe hundreds of thousands in upfront development time and cost compared to building out an open source stack.
So they handle the complexity, but you lose some control. It's kind of a black box.
Exactly. An EY leader called it abstracting away much of the control. But for many common use cases, customer service bots, content generation, the out-of-the-box power of something like GPT-4 might be perfectly fine. No deep customization needed.
It really comes back to internal capabilities again. Got the AI muscle, open source might be tempting, needs speed and simplicity. Proprietary looks good.
Precisely. And it's not always either.
Right. You mentioned that hybrid approach, using orchestration to route tasks.
Yeah, that's becoming more common. Maybe use a cheap open model for simple stuff, then call out to a powerful proprietary API for the really tough queries.
Sounds smart, but probably complex to set up itself.
Oh, definitely. It's an advanced integration project on its own. But it can optimize TCO by playing to the strengths of both worlds.
Okay, let's pivot to ongoing costs, maintenance and support. With open source, that's all on you, right? You're the service provider.
You are. You're responsible for updates, performance monitoring, security patching, keeping it highly available. It's continuous work. That means ongoing costs for staff ML engineers, DevOps, AI ops people.
Yeah.
Some estimate annual maintenance can be like 15% to 30% of the initial project cost every year.
Like if something breaks.
You fix it. Or you pay for third-party support if available. The community support is there. It's often great, but it's informal. No SLAs. This is where the long-term TCO for open source can sometimes creep up, especially if you underestimate the operational complexity and the cost of that specialized talent.
Talent, which is hard to find, right? Didn't you mention a stat?
Yeah, something like 75% of companies struggle to find the AI expertise they need. That shortage makes a bundled support from vendors very appealing.
So proprietary vendors handle the maintenance. It's baked into the price.
Typically, yes. Updates, security, performance tuning, that's their job. You often get service-level agreements, SLAs, guaranteeing uptime. Enterprise contracts, like OpenAI's, might start around $240K a year, but that includes support and guarantees. It makes the cost much more predictable.
You're essentially outsourcing the maintenance burden and risk.
Exactly. You benefit from their economies of scale. You need fewer internal ops people focused just on the model infrastructure, maybe just application developers integrating the API. It raises that question again. What's the price you're willing to pay for predictability and offloading that complexity?
Makes sense. Okay, what about the most obvious cost? Licensing and subscription fees. Open source is often free, right? Apache license LMA2 allows commercial use.
Mostly, yeah. The licenses themselves are often permissive, no direct fee. That's a huge upfront advantage. Costs shift, as we said, to infra and people. And you avoid vendor lock-in. You can switch models more easily.
But free isn't costless.
Never is. The costs are just different. And be aware, if you use a managed service for an open source model, like on AWS SageMaker or Azure ML, you'll pay platform fees for using their infrastructure and tools, even if the model itself is free. So open source mainly cuts recurring license fees, assuming you handle the operations.
Got it. Proprietary, though, that's where the direct fees live. Subscriptions, usage-based charges.
Right, per token, per call. Enterprises often negotiate custom deals, annual commits, sometimes running into the hundreds of thousands, even millions for heavy users. These are direct recurring costs.
But there's value bundled in there, too. Security, compliance help, those SLAs?
Often, yes. And CFOs sometimes prefer OpEx, remember. It scales with the business, predictable budget item. The big pitfall, though, is that lock-in. Building your apps around one specific API makes switching really hard, potentially expensive.
Although competition seems to be helping with prices, GPT-4o being much cheaper.
Definitely. The market's dynamic, constantly reassessing value. That's good for buyers.
Yeah.
But you also need to factor in those stealth costs on both sides.
Stealth costs. Like what?
Well, for proprietary, think about API management tools, potential overreach charges if you exceed your plan, maybe extra compliance costs depending on the vendor. For open source, you've got legal time vetting licenses, maybe paying for third-party support contracts, internal audit costs, building security infrastructure around the model. You got to budget for those softer costs too.
Okay, good point. Lastly, let's touch on performance and scalability. How does that feed into TCO?
Well, performance impacts TCO indirectly. Historically, proprietary models like GPT-4 or Claude often had an edge in raw capability because they were trained on massive data sets. A more powerful model might get you the right answer faster or need fewer tries. Think about summarizing a document on Llama PaintChef. One good summary costs less than 3 mediocre ones needing human editing.
But open source is catching up fast, you said.
Incredibly fast. Llama 3.1, for example, is right up there with the top proprietary models on many benchmarks. And again, open models can be specialized. One analysis showed an open model matching quality but running at like 7 times cheaper for a specific task. So the key question isn't just cost per token, it's maybe cost per correct result or cost per valuable outcome.
Interesting perspective. And scalability. Proprietary seems built for massive scale.
They are huge multi-tenant platforms, auto-scaling, global reach. Scaling usually means a fairly linear cost increase, pay more, get more capacity. Open source scaling can be lumpier. You might need to buy another rack of servers, a discrete jump in CapEx, and complexity to manage load balancing, etc.
But open source has edge cases where it shines, like literally on the edge.
Exactly. Edge deployments, running models on devices in a factory maybe, or where data has to stay local for privacy or latency reasons. An open model running locally avoids network hops, offers low latency, full data control. Some analysis from Wing VC highlighted how latency, cost, and security concerns are driving choices, and open source often wins on those fronts if you deploy it locally. Proprietary relies on the vendor's massive infra spend, like OpenAI's reported $7 billion a year budget.
So you're trading off vendor scale for local control. Maybe a hybrid approach works here too. Open source for baseline, proprietary for peaks.
Yeah, that's emerging too. Use open source day-to-day, but maybe fall back to a proprietary API if your own systems get overloaded.
Yeah.
It's about reliability under load, getting those enterprise features you need, one way or another.
Okay, theory's great, but let's make this concrete. What does this look like in the real world? Can we look at some companies? Let's start with that financial services firm you mentioned. High volume, right? 50,000 documents a month.
They looked at GPT-4, around $720K a year. Claude was maybe $580K. But building their own custom open source model. It was about $1.2 million upfront, year one cost for dev and infra, then maybe $300 a year after that for upkeep.
So more expensive initially.
Way more. But because their volume was so high, that break-even point hit around 27 months in. After that, their open source costs were lower and stable. Plus, they got a model tailored specifically for finance and kept sensitive data on-premise. Worth it for them.
Okay, contrast that with the e-commerce company. Moderate volume, 100K inquiries a month.
Right. They looked at GPT 3.5 Turbo, about 180K a year, Claude Instant maybe 150K, and open source build was projected at $900 a upfront, then $220K annually.
And the break even?
Never happened in their projections. The volume just wasn't high enough to make back that big initial investment compared to the relatively low ongoing API costs. Proprietary was always cheaper and easier for their scale. Their takeaway: start proprietary, validate, then maybe build custom if you hit massive scale.
That makes perfect sense. And the hybrid example, second front systems and defense.
Yeah, fascinating case. They use open source internally for experimenting, prototyping. It's cheap, fast for that. But for actual customer deployments, especially sensitive ones, they go proprietary. They need the enterprise support, the compliance certifications, the guaranteed performance and data handling that comes with a vetted vendor in their space. Their TCO calculation includes risk, speed, compliance, not just dollars. It's a portfolio strategy based on risk and maturity.
So different tools for different jobs, essentially. And then you have Meta going all in on open source at massive scale.
Right. Investing billions in infrastructure for Llama. That shows that at hyperscale, owning the stack, controlling the models, avoiding massive vendor fees, it makes economic sense. They achieve cost effectiveness and strategic control.
Wow. So these cases really drive home that TCO is totally context dependent. Scale, customization needs, regulations, internal skills. It all matters.
Absolutely. No single right answer.
And this choice, it doesn't just affect the IT budget, does it? It ripples through the whole business.
Oh, completely. Strategically, it shapes how widely you can even deploy AI. Is it a core differentiator you need deep control over? Maybe favoring open source, or an enabler where speed to market via proprietary is key. Operationally, open source demands strong internal teams, model ops, AI platforms. You're building that capability. Proprietary lightens that internal load but creates dependency on the vendor. Hybrid tries to balance that.
How about innovation? Does one approach foster it better?
It's a mix. Low-cost open source can encourage more experimentation across the company. But per-use fees on proprietary might make teams hesitant to try new things if budgets are tight. On the flip side, proprietary vendors push new features and capabilities very quickly. Competitively, mastering open source could give you a cost edge. Using top-tier proprietary models might give you a product quality edge. And in some industries, proving data privacy via an internal open source setup could be a competitive advantage itself.
Okay, so if I'm an executive listening right now trying to figure this out for my company, how do I know which profile fits best?
Well, let's try to paint some profiles. Size and scale is a big one. Large enterprises, Fortune 500 types with heavy, sustained AI workloads. They're often better positioned to make the upfront investment in open source payoff, SMBs. Usually, the pay-per-use of proprietary is much more manageable.
Makes sense. What about industry?
Huge factor. Highly regulated. Banking, healthcare. They might lean open source for auditability and data control, or need specific proprietary offerings with on-prem or private cloud options. Tech companies, digital natives, often have the talent for open source, value customization, and building IP, but a startup in tech might still use proprietary for speed initially. Industries with fluctuating demand, like retail. Proprietary's elasticity is appealing. Manufacturing, logistics, focusing on efficiency. Stable, high-volume open source, maybe even on the edge, could be perfect.
And internal skills, digital maturity.
Probably the clearest indicator. Strong internal AML teams. They can handle open source, maybe even prefer it. Limited expertise. Proprietary is often the safer, faster path. It bundles the talent in a way. That AI talent shortage makes vendor support really attractive.
Okay, and the specific use case matters too, right?
Absolutely. Got super unique tasks or highly sensitive proprietary data. Fine-tuning an open model might be the only way to get the performance and control you need. Worth the TCO then. But for general stuff, standard customer service, basic copywriting. Off-the-shelf proprietary models are often excellent and require far less effort. You really have to map the solution to the specific problem and your own capabilities.
Okay, let's try and bring this all together. The ultimate takeaway seems to be there's no silver bullet. It's all about your specific context, your priorities.
It's exactly right. You can boil it down to a few key decision criteria for executives. Usage volume and duration. High and sustained. Open source looks better long term. Low or sporadic. Proprietary probably wins. Project that out 1 to 3 years. Customization needed. Deep specific tuning. Favors open source despite the complexity. Standard tasks. Proprietary is easier. Time to market. Need it now. Rapid iteration. Proprietary often gets you there faster. Many start there, then evaluate custom later. Control, security, compliance. Need absolute data control. Want to own the tech stack. Open source, likely on-prem. Can trust a vetted third party. Proprietary can work. And finally, internal capabilities. Got a strong MLOps team. They can thrive with open source. Limited expertise. Proprietary is often the more prudent initial choice.
That's a great checklist, but things are changing so fast. What about the future? What should we be preparing for in the next, say, 1 to 3 years?
Yeah, the crystal ball is hazy, but we can game out a few scenarios. Scenario 1, open source continues its rapid advance. Models get even better, maybe match or beat proprietary consistently, become easier to deploy and tune. In that world, the TCO balance tilts more towards open source because the non-dollar costs decrease. What do? Invest in internal AI skills now. Pilot open models. Get your data strategy sorted for fine-tuning. Plan for scaling infrastructure.
Okay, scenario 2.
Proprietary platforms consolidate and dominate. Maybe a few big players pull ahead, innovate super fast, integrate deeply into everything. Prices might level off, not drop much more. What do you do then? Negotiate hard with vendors, volume discounts, fixed prices, strong SLAs. Avoid getting locked into just one vendor if possible. Look at interoperability. Keep an eye on open source's leverage. Focus your value add around the vendor models. Monitor that ROI constantly.
And a third possibility.
Hybrid becomes the norm. Everyone uses a mix. Orchestration tools get really good. Cloud providers offer seamless platforms for both open and proprietary. Actions here. Adopt a portfolio mindset. Get good at matching workloads to the right model type. Leverage cloud offerings for managed open source. Update your internal governance for this mixed world. Stay agile.
Interesting. Across all those futures, though, the common thread seems to be building flexibility into your strategy. Don't bet the farm on just one approach.
Absolutely. To wrap it up, TCO for generative AI is nuanced. It's context-dependent. Open source can offer great long-term value at scale if you have the expertise. Proprietary offers immediate value, ease, solid support, often better TCO for moderate use or those without deep internal teams. The smartest companies? They'll likely use both, strategically blending them to optimize cost, risk, and capability based on their specific needs and goals.
Okay, fantastic. So, for the executives listening, let's boil this down to 5 key actionable takeaways. 1, do that holistic TCO analysis. Don't just look at the license fee. Map out all the costs, infra, talent, integration, support, risk over several years. Model different scenarios. 2, align the solution with your strengths. Be honest about your team's capabilities. Got the engineers and the volume. Open source might save you money long term. Need speed and lack deep AI expertise. Proprietary is likely lower TCO and faster. 3, think crawl, walk, run. Maybe start with proprietary APIs, pilot things quickly, cheaply, get real data on usage. Then decide if building custom or moving to open source makes sense for scale. Stay agile. 4, develop clear governance. For proprietary, negotiate good terms, have an exit plan. For open source, manage security, bias, reliability rigorously internally. Have a consistent checklist for both. And 5, maximize value. Remember, low cost is pointless without business value. Whether you go open or proprietary, focus on driving adoption, training users, and actually using the AI to boost productivity or create innovation. That's how you justify the TCO. Ultimately, the most cost-optimized solution means little if it doesn't deliver business value. The real win comes from leveraging AI to drive productivity and innovation no matter which path you choose. Thank you for joining the podcast, and see you soon.